So today we're trying something new in the auditorium where we actually see real life cases, see the transformation, see what's possible, because our methods look so simple that people often believe that there's no real transformation that happens, that we're all kind of just lucky to have easy dogs to work with. And and I've heard this so often. Oh yeah, Chiru will do all this, but my dog won't do this.
Mm.
And very rarely do people realize that it wasn't this easy, all the time. Especially Nishi, the way I write and talk about her now, people think that she was just such an angelic dog and I had nothing going on. What people don't realize is that I started on this journey because I was out of options. She had turned so dog reactive that I had tried everything and nothing worked. And that's why I kind of started on this journey. And Chiru also, I mean, now she looks like this perfect angelic dog, but she has gotten into fights with Nishi. She's actually bitten Nishi on, a couple of occasions. And I've kind of really not known what to do about it. And so I think telling our stories as honestly as possible is very important so that people really can see themselves in our stories, see themselves in our struggles, and understand that there are ways to deal with it. It's just that we have to have a discipline to not do some things and to do some things. So I'm really happy to be welcoming Surabhi Venkatesh, who's very close to finishing BACBED, and will be our third graduate who will be following the BARCS method, and I'm very very excited about that. And she'll be working out of New Delhi, but all our students are well equipped to work remotely as well, and that's kind of our methods work like that. And Surabhi's story I thought was an important one to highlight because she has two lovely dogs, so Luchi and Mutton, and they were both adopted. Am I right?
Yeah.
And they both came with certain issues. And I think in one case it wasn't very evident what the issues were, but in the other case it was very kind of glaring. So I'll let Surabhi talk about those details.
Yeah. So I think that I'll start with Luchi because she's our first dog. And so I think the big struggle for me with Luchi was it was the first time that I was a pet parent. And so to I wasn't equipped with knowledge and skills to sort of raise a dog, right? So a lot of it was dependent on what other people had shared with me, whatever information was very quickly accessible. And unfortunately, a lot of the information out there was very much grounded in training, obedience, and I think some extensive use of like aversives and punitive methods. And so I think that really influenced our style of parenting with her. And what's really interesting is that when we brought her home, I sort of took a backseat with the parenting. I became the person who does the food for her, but all the behavior stuff, and I think it was very distinct. There was food and there was behavior. There were two separate pieces. I think a lot of the behavior stuff got relegated to my husband because he was just really good with like the now I say he's just really good with the training, right? Like, cue, reward, all of that. And I always found that really complicated and stressful. So I said, I can't do this. That's your bucket. Um, and so I think it was divided like that. But I think that I also think that because there was not enough knowledge, I think we overlooked a lot of um, behaviors that she had as very like normal dog behaviors, right? And that's also what social media sort of threw at us. So, for example, for the first 18 months of her time with us, like zoomies were a regular part of her life and every day, right? And we always assumed that, oh, she's a really happy dog and look at her, getting into so many zoomies and that's so good. I realized much later. And in fact, I actually have a video of her zooming around, and oh my god, this was such an incredible exercise of finding these things. So let me know if I should put a link of it right now so that you get a sense of it. I'd request you actually to put it on mute because I'm screeching in the video, so it can be a little loud. But you'll get a sense of basically how she was.
Where's the bottle? Where's the bottle? Where's the bottle? Luchi, where's the bottle? Where's the bottle? Get the bottle. Go get the bottle. Get the bottle. The bottle's there. Luchi. Luchi. There. Bottle. Where's the bottle? Where's the bottle? Bottle's there. Go see her. Luchi. Luchi.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was wincing because the amount of slipping and skidding on that floor, and I was, and Nishi used to do that too. And my God, now that we know the kind of muscular damage that does, you watch that, now knowing anatomy and looking at that, and you realize, oh my God. And you're right. I mean, I think people are told that this is just a happy dog, and
Yeah.
not a dog that is busy damaging himself or herself. And
Yeah.
and I remember you describing Luchi pre-BACBED as a always on dog, and now I can kind of see that.
Yeah. And so I think that I think the zoomies were, a part of her day-to-day life. I think that she also she struggled with massive separation anxiety. So she used to be barking when left alone, scratching doors, urinating all over the place. She used to be counter surfing when we were not there. She would sort of find ways to get into the kitchen, scavenge through the dustbin. She would jump when people would come over at them. And it was almost like people coming over used to be so cup filling that she would jump and then immediately relieve herself right then and there in the house. There used to be lots of chewing and shredding. So anytime we gave her plush toys, they would just be decimated completely, right? And a lot of that. She also, all of her interactions, I have another video actually, and I just discovered this last night, and I was like, I have to put this because all of her interactions with other dogs used to be pet dogs and used to be on leash interactions, right? And so the reason why I wanted to also share this video is because I think with the Zoomies video and this video, I think you get a really good sense of how on she was all the time. So I've just put the link there as well. Yeah.
Luchi. Luchi. You can't handle the energy. Okay.
I mean, and your reaction in the video, I think, is also very sort of something that so many of us do, right? Which is we find this very cute, and it's okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with happy dogs, but it also, what people don't realize is this is sort of the precursor to a lot of bad interactions that really, don't go the way we want it to. This is the one that kind of starts spiraling. It starts like this, and this is also, when I saw these interactions in comparison to streeties, I realized this is highly age inappropriate. This is like a, under 6 month behavior. Over 6 months, We just don't see this anymore. Streeties would not tolerate this with dogs above 6 months. And it's, the streeties that Chiru and Nishi would play with, they would look at Nishi with this, what a weird adult who plays like that kind of a expression on their face, right? And then none of the adults engaged with them, only the puppies did, because our dogs were acting like puppies, so they were kind of put at the kids table kind of a thing. um and and it's very hard for dogs to give that puppy license to adult dogs that are behaving like puppies. And I think that's also a big part of, like we were discussing play yesterday, I mean, day before yesterday. I think a big part of that is also that age inappropriateness. And so, I don't even know what these poor dogs are learning about social interaction, or, how to do it, how not to do it. And then the other thing that kind of came to mind for me was when you mentioned counter surfing in the context of separation anxiety. I've heard a lot of people describe it as, oh, the dog is just waiting for people to go away from home and then they want to get naughty. But with Chiru, I have seen repeatedly that the only time she actually counter surfs or, kind of steals food or something is when I'm away from home and something has triggered her anxiety. So something, maybe, like, she doesn't have full-on separation anxiety, but sometimes, like recently, I think we've been having rains in South India. I don't know if that's the case in the north as well. So the last 3 days, and it was very unanticipated. I didn't know that. So I had gone out, and then there was heavy thunderstorms and rains that started when I was out. So when I came back home, I saw that she was sitting in a very unusual place, on top of a bench. That's not where she usually sits. And she had pulled everything out of the dustbin. She had pulled everything out of the kitchen counters, and everything was lying around, almost like stress eating, I would say. And I think people don't see that it was something went wrong with with the emotional regulation of the dog when you were away. And sadly, dogs get punished for it. It is not seen as separation anxiety. Very rarely is it actually classified under separation anxiety. So it's a very good and important point you brought up.
Yeah, I think if I can just share two things. I think one was a lot of Luchi's hyperactivity we also just attributed to oh, she's a boxer. Boxers are always very puppy-like, and this is what it is. And she's a younger dog and stuff like that, right? And I mean, emotional regulation though wasn't a concept for us at all, right? Forget familiarizing myself for it for my own self, but also for my dogs, right? But I don't think that existed. I think we attributed a lot of it to just her breed, which of course is now completely out of the window. But I think even with in the separation anxiety piece, you're absolutely right, because there were so many times that I would come back and we used to leave her alone for 8 hours at a stretch, right? And she was all by herself. And this is also after 40 minutes of intense exercise to tire her out, right? And so I would come back on so many different occasions to find that she has gotten into the kitchen, put down food, finished our dinner, opened the dustbin, put everything out. And my reaction always used to be what did you do? Right? This concept that she is struggling in this situation never even occurred to me beyond, for example, the barking and the scratching, right? Because that also sounds and seems very escalated. But anything to do with food, I think, was just misconceived as, oh, you're being naughty or you're being greedy, I think that link between the two just did not exist at all. And I think that also, I think is a little bit of an insight into how we responded to some of these behaviors, right? It was either, for example, with her jumping, we pretty much ignored it. We said, oh, she's so cute. She's being so cute. It's okay. Let her jump and, it's fine. I think that was one approach. And the other was where we would do repeated no's. What are you doing? That kind of the intent is really to shame and induce guilt, but without the understanding that this is this is registering very, very differently for her. So I think, yeah, that's really how we sort of responded to all of that. Yeah.
How
You
about
wanna
mutton?
ask? Oh dear.
Tell us a little bit about.
Yeah.
You saved
I
the best
think,
for last.
yeah. I think and I was telling Sindhu this in when we spoke about this previously as well, that I think with mutton, like her baggage to me was much more evident and visible because it showed up in very like specific behaviors that we would otherwise categorize as aggressive. So there was a lot of, for example, on walks, there was a lot of lunging, a lot of leash pulling. She was constantly restless. She used to bolt out of the, house at every opportunity when the front door would open. She would be constantly barking, right? She would see anybody cross from the terrace, from the balcony, and she'd be barking at them. She'd hear dogs bark elsewhere, she'd be barking at them. She was extremely like touch sensitive. Her neck was an absolute no-no for her to touch. She would, if we came too close to her, there was a lot of teeth baring, lip curling, um, and then of course there was also resource guarding with bones and treats and food. I mean, there was a lot of resource guarding with food. She got into 2 3 really massive fights with Luchi, and in one of them, like, Luchi was really badly hurt. Nothing, I mean, nothing, it was just bad. It was a lot for us because we were also carrying a lot of weight um, of her being a pit bull type dog. And again, there is just so much misinformation out there about the breed. And so I think even though I kept fighting that narrative for myself, I think somewhere at the back of my head, I kept having doubts, right? About, is this something to do with the breed? I'm not sure. And so let me just pull up a few videos that I have of mutton as well. With mutton, though, I think the big thing was not having the mind space only to take videos at that time because I was just so stressed at all points. But I have a video of her like and an interaction with a cow. And you will see this. So I've just put the link. I can see Sindhu's face as well. So I feel like this was a really when I was reflecting, right, and going through these videos, I thought this was a really important video because I think it completely and totally showed like how ill-equipped we were and how we didn't have the knowledge to deal with this, right? Because we never saw this behavior with Luchi. And so I think for the first couple of times, we actually went closer. And I think this was one of those times when we went closer to a cow thinking she just wants to say hi. Right. And then we start picking up saying, wait, something's off about this. That is not the intent of this, right? And so you can see that there's, pulling her back, right? And so I think that was definitely one big realization we had. I also found this other video of hers, which also shows just like how fearful I think she was, which we never sort of really focused on. I think her breed perceptions like took over this, and I discovered this, and I was just like, my heart went out to her.
Don't worry, this is done. Chalo. Ask, chalo, go back to bed. Nothing there, darling. Chalo, come. Bed. Come, sweetie. Bed. Come. Come, darling, come. Maru. Bye, friends. Hi, Maru. Same, that's okay.
Uh, so recently, Chiro is a very cautious dog. So I see a lot of this with her even now. So recently, my friend lent me a wood burning stove, which is kind of quite tall, and we had kept it on this one. And she has trouble with visual integration. So anything you keep at a height, she kind of really freaks out. And so she was kind of growling at the stove, and everybody on site was like, it's okay, it's a stove, it's a stove. And I was like, wait, this is a very easy fix. I just went up to the stove and I pet the stove, and she's like, okay, fine. And it was that quick, like so quick, with her kind of saying, oh, it doesn't bite, fine, I'll come and check it out. And she checked it out and she was like, yeah, this is just inert metal, no big deal. So I think some things, and for, if you didn't know what you were looking for, it would seem like nothing. It would seem like, there's no technique to it, and people talking about, okay, counter condition, give treats, and like complicating it. And but only I know how terrified Chiru can get of things so easily. And the fix is actually simple if you know what to do with it, kind of get in their minds.
And so I think what I picked up with Mutton very quickly was that she needs reassurance constantly, right? So I went down the very, conventional way of constantly telling her it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, and then getting frustrated that, oh my God, you're not listening to me, you're not understanding that it's okay. But I think we realized very quickly that what she needs is very, very different from what Luchi, not needed, but I think how we engaged with Luchi, right? I think there was also, interestingly, this, both Arnav and I felt at that point in time that we cannot, for example, do the nose with her, what are you doing with her? Because one, I think there was very genuinely like a little bit of like hesitation about her breed again, and that response. But also we realized very quickly that she's anyway so fearful that that'll just sort of put her further into a corner. So I think that sense sort of started emerging for us a little bit with her as well. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe you can tell us, do you have any video or anything to tell us where they are at now?
Of course. Okay. So actually, interestingly, all of my favorite videos now of them are them actually just doing like them out on walks. And so I'll just put one video of that.
It's interesting for me because it looks like a whole lot of nothing, right?
Yeah.
You're
But
like,
yeah, it's just like two dogs walking. That's
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah. I also have another video of actually using the hand signal with Mattu.
I love that. I love that. Don't you have one more of
Yeah. So this one is just for a little bit of context. So Mutton has been quite dog reactive, to the point that if she would see another dog walking, just even like if parallel walking, for example, like she would just lunge, bark, lose all presence of mind. And so this happened very recently. You'll see it in the video at the far end. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah. There is a big golden retriever, which is a little bit of a trigger for her.
Come, sweetheart.
And do you have another one of Mutton where I think you're calling her back? She's
Yeah,
off
yeah, one
leash.
second. Yeah, I'll share that as well.
Hi. Shit, I don't think she got to poop properly.
Stuck in a bum.
It's a boy.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
But I have another video actually of Luchi interacting with another dog. I'd shared this as well on the BACBED group many months ago. I've just put the link. There are a couple of things that I could have done differently, but it'll give you a sense of the interaction now, especially since we've seen previous interactions.
Be careful, Luchi.
नहीं सर जाते लोग हाँ इसमें नहाने जाते हैं हाँ
भैया आप एक कप दही दे देंगे और इन दोनों के लिए आप 2 प्लेट भुर्जी दे देंगे प्लेन भुर्जी हाँ उसमें बस अंडा चाहिए थैंक यू
No.
It's really interesting for me. She's very cognizant about creating space. She's like, I know I get a bit hyper, but she kind of creates space, withdraws herself. It's interesting. Okay.
And I feel like, I think when I look back at her previous interaction, right, the video that you saw, like there was no thinking. There was no thinking, no decision making, no presence of mind, right? But here I can see her pausing, processing, figuring things out. And I do think that a lot of this she has learned because of her interactions with Mutton. Because Mattu is a very, like, play respectfully, play like an adult, right? And give me space and take space and focus on what I'm communicating to you. And she's been burnt a little bit because of that, right? Because of her hyperness. I feel like now she's a little bit more cognizant in her interactions as well. And of course, it definitely helps that she has over here, she's playing with a streetie, right? So there's so much that I don't have to worry about because there's incredible feedback that's just coming from there.
Yeah. Okay, great. So why don't you walk us through what are all the things you did or maybe didn't do, or how did you get here? What happened?
Oh dear. So I obviously have, Sindhu's going to laugh at this. I have no recollection of the sequence in which I did things. I think I just did a lot of things together. In Luchi's case, I think the first and foremost thing that I did was just stop all adrenalizing activity, right? I think the hyperness was very, very visible. I think that came through very obviously in terms of like cup filling through it gave me language, right? Through the canine essentials. And so I think we stopped all fetch, we stopped all running around, no more tugs at home, for example. And I think this was very, very hard for my husband because for him, that was his way of connecting with her. And so when I was taking that away, it felt like now how do I connect? Like, what do I do? Because I can't do all this emotional stuff, you know. And that's been a journey as well. But I think that was definitely one of the first things we sort of put into place. Alongside that, I think I was also sort of doing, I think I just completed my nutrition diploma. So I already knew, for example, the relevance of bones, right? And so now I had, you know, a behavior approach plus a nutrition approach to support that. And so we definitely, you know, did a lot of chewing. We did a lot of sniffing. So I think the first 6 months of latter part of 2020 was really just about like lots of, you know, snuffle mats, lots of treat scatters, lots of stuff like that. I think the calming activities that came through with Canine Essentials were very easy for me to implement, very quick to implement. So I think that's definitely something that I did. I also, I think in Luchi's case, really questioned certain rules that we had put into place that I don't think were relevant to me. So, for example, we had a rule that she would not enter the kitchen. And I think during the Canine Essentials, I think I was just like, wait, why do I even have this rule? Like, it does not make sense. And I know that Arnav wanted to put that rule into place for some reason, but I was like, wait, but I'm at home the most of the time. It doesn't make sense to me anymore. So I think we started reflecting on some of those rules that we put into place that were no longer needed, right? And I think through the Canine Essentials, I got confidence to say, this is what works for me, and it's not arbitrary rules that I'm putting, right? So for me, it's absolutely okay if she has XYZ, she has access to XYZ things. So I think that's definitely something that we did. We obviously stopped yelling, saying no. All of that though was just like out of the window. That was just, I think, again, along with the stopping the adrenalizing activities, that I think that was the other big thing that we did. And yeah, I think I also think that I was lucky enough to do the Canine Essentials when we were all in lockdown. So I was really forced in general to slow down, right? Like I wasn't, you know, we were not going out as much. We were not socializing as much. Like we were working from home. I had so much time to sort of just spend with her and just, you know, enjoy that time with her, which I think automatically brought about huge changes in our lifestyle as well.
One thing that I did want to kind of comment on is it's really interesting. So we started out with problems of separation anxiety and hyperactive interactions with dogs. And in all that you spoke about, I didn't hear you mention crating. I didn't hear you mention socialization. These are typically the things that people do. And that's something that is not even in this picture. And I'm guessing, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm guessing a lot of work with Mutton also is somewhat along similar lines. Were there anything extra that you had to do with Mutton?
Yeah, I think with Mutton, actually, we did a lot of avoidance. We practiced a lot of avoidance with her, right? So we stopped taking her to our regular routes for walks. We changed the time that we would take her out. We avoided all places with dogs, with cows, all of that, right? We just actively focused on avoidance in the external environment, particularly. In the internal environment, I particularly focused a lot on reassurance. And so very actively, like, I think for me, and again, I think this was a turning point in my relationship with Mutton, because after the first 2 fights that Mutton and Luchi had, up until the second fight, I always thought that Mutton's at fault. Right? For several reasons, Mutton's at fault. And so Luchi is the one who needs to be kept safe. After the second fight, I realized actually Mutton is the one who needs to be kept safe. And she's the one I need to sort of protect. So what I started doing is very actively, when I could see Luchi getting hyper, I would split and I would separate them and everything. That was a game changer, because I remember this one moment when I split and I sort of separated them, and Mutton looked at me and she was like, "You get it. Like, you just get it," right? I think another thing that I missed out in Mutton's journey was also we did do pain assessment, because I couldn't necessarily see a pattern with her fights. And so I just knew that this is not normal behavior. There's something going on with that. And so we did a Garland consult. We identified certain points of discomfort. And in fact, even when I submitted my first massage video to Julia for feedback, she caught on the moment when I start massaging Mutton, and she looks up at me and she's like, "Oh my God, you get it." So I think that there were so many cues there that came through. So I think the avoidance and the splitting and reassurance is what we very actively did with Mutton. That was different.
Yeah. The pain, I think, even when you were telling Mutton's story, it was, there was the clue right there, right? Neck, touch sensitivity, it was right there. And avoidance, this is something that I hadn't seen it as a formal technique for dealing with anxiety till I read the book on anxiety by Peter Ledoux. Now, anybody who reads the book, not forget his first name. What Ledoux is here? Forget his first name. The book is called Anxiety. And if you read his book, it's a little difficult to digest, because he argues very strongly that animals don't feel it, which his argument doesn't hold. But he does talk about sort of the evidence for different kinds of things that work on anxiety with people. And he talks about how even things like medication, desensitization, and he's talking about, PTSD and things like that with human beings. And, the drawbacks of all of these, how they're not known to work. Even if they do work, it seems to be like very small, short-lived successes. And then there is a kind of a spontaneous reemergence of anxiety. And amongst the things that he does talk about having long-lasting, known effect, positive effect on issues with anxiety, and one of them there is active avoidance. So avoidance is one part of it, which is, it doesn't fill the cup up, and active avoidance is the other part of it, which is the dog learning that I have a choice to walk away. And I think that kind of can come in at a later stage when the dog's brain is beginning to work and they're able to think through things. And the other thing that kind of stood out for me is, like you mentioned, anticipating what are those triggers and immediately kind of jumping to their rescue, saying, if I need to separate you, if I need to split, if I need to sort of, I know this is going to go bad. So if I can actually either be the human shield, or even hand signals work at a later point, but that letting them know that, okay, don't worry, I know you're going to freak out about this, don't worry, I gotcha, right? And I want to give a quick example here before I kind of open for questions, because we're really running out of time. For some of you who've been following me on social media, 2-3 years ago, Chiru, even when I was in Bangalore, Chiru has an intense fear of electricity, and that's just electricity. So, and this is Bangalore, right? So we lose power all the time. We have voltage fluctuations all the time. And every time we have a voltage fluctuation, she would go sit in the bathroom and shake like a leaf. Absolutely shake like a leaf. And power comes on or off. And this was so difficult for me. I won't leave her home alone, because you never know when we get power and lose power. And so I always had to have a sitter, and she was terrified of losing electricity. Now we have a little kind of a mosquito net in the bed, and we have a lot of mosquitoes because it's the farm, and I have an electric mosquito bat, which I bring out, and there's a mosquito in there, and I go zap at it. But I let her know up front, Chiru, common enemy, okay? I'm going to get this, and hand signal, and then zap. She'll be sleeping. She wakes up, she looks at it, and then goes back to sleep. Much like the Mutton's video, I can't believe that I'm bringing electricity into that tent of ours, that closed space, and she's okay with it, and she's going back to sleep and not shaking in her boots. And I think that's about anticipating and reassuring, and the sooner we do it before it happens, I think it makes a huge difference. All right. So if there are no more comments, thank you so much for sharing that with us, Surabhi. I know it isn't easy. Especially the before story, to kind of admit it, because it's difficult. Those stories are difficult. We've done things we don't want to do. We've put our dogs through things we don't want to put them through. But also just acknowledging that they even went through what they did. It's a very difficult one to share. But I think it was very useful. So thank you so much.